Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order and then get something to eat and then while we're having our meeting, if that's okay with everybody. Does that work? All right, so we'll call the meeting to order and we'll ask Mr. Toscano to take care of our prayer and the pledge and then we'll go eat.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm going to give the prayer, if you would. Dear Lord, during this wonderful time of year, let us trust in you. And we all celebrate the many lights of joy you share with us during this magic time of year. Let us all see beyond this time and place to the promises you have made, the hope you hold for us, and the feast of life you wish to share. Let us be thankful for your gift of life now and forever. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Stand for the
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are we okay?
Okay, so we'll try to get started here. We only have 3 things on our agenda this evening. All of them are important for our future, but none of them is as important in my mind as the community-based accountability system. We've been telling the community and our teachers for years that we don't like the state accountability system and we need to do something else. And we're going to focus on that. So we've done some good work. It's the foundation. There's more to do, but wanted the board to be able to see what had been done so far so that we can make sure that we're all going in the same direction, that we all feel comfortable with what we're doing. I don't know whether anybody was able to read the Lone Star this last issue, but there was a fairly large section in there about certifications, learning that was not necessarily totally academically inclined, but it was more leading to industry certifications, those kind of things. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder, but you need to know that we're one of a very short list of school districts in the state that are taking this on as an independent project. So you can feel good about that. And our community is going to tell us what they want out of us and our district so that public education works and that we can really ignore the state accountability system and deal with our community. So, with that, Mr. Scott.
Sir, Mr. Bryant, just a couple of things to bring everybody back up to speed with kind of how we got here. The board, as Mr. Bryant said, has been very clear that we do not want to be test-centric, that we don't want our curriculum to be reduced to test preparation, and our community has screamed very loudly for a long time that that's not what we want to use to determine the value of a child or the intelligence of a child and the quality of the teacher and the quality of our schools, that it was too limiting to do all of that and to tell us all of that. We also know that when we look at state accountability reports and we look at federal accountability reports, they don't always jive, and we oftentimes walk away more confused than excited about the possibilities for improvement. The board's also been very clear that we want to answer the question, to whom are we accountable and for what? And we don't want to be accountable to the state for high and rising test scores. We want to be accountable to our community for what they value and for what they want for their kids from their school system. A couple of years ago, we pulled a community group together very similar to the one that's responsible for the work that we're going to engage with today, and they produced a profile of a graduate, which was essentially parents and staff across the district and community partners and students coming together. We believe Mr. Mulkey was part of that committee, as was Mr. Bryant. And they said, hey, when a kid goes to our school system and finishes, these are the attributes that we want them to have and take with them into the world. We believe that this is the next level of that work, that this is a way for us to really begin to operationalize this and realize it and monitor the effects of what we're doing. Is it truly helping us to develop students with these attributes? The board last year adopted a resolution that said that when the state commissioner by law is required to put out an A through F accountability system that basically grades schools. It takes everything that a school system does or a school does and says, we're going to reduce it down to one letter grade. And because of the work of the gentleman, John Tanner, who's here today, the state got real educated about what the limitations were with that. And simply put, an A school doesn't have every child in it and every teacher in it that is up to A standards. But when you were given an A, you assume everything's perfectly fine and you overlook the needs of many students and the deficiencies of many staff. Just as a D school thinks that, well, we're all Ds, we're terrible, we're failures, when in reality that's not the case. So it's just one example among many where that particular system is going to do more harm than good for us if we rely too heavily on it. We also know that standardized tests or an accountability system that focuses heavily on standardized tests is only a partial accounting. It only measures a fraction of the curriculum that is being taught. It only reports on a fraction of the things that actually happen in our school system. And so John Tanner in a little bit is going to talk a little bit about this idea of a partial accounting versus a complete accounting. But if you want to account for the impact of what we do, you have to account for it in a complete way, not in a partial way. Because if you only have a partial accounting, you run the risk of making assumptions that are not true. Therefore, leveraging resources and making decisions that are not true, they're misguided. So you need a complete accounting in order for the board to be able to make really sound decisions about what we need to do more of, what we need to stop doing, and what we need to pay attention to. The other thing we know, as Mr. Bryan indicated, is, for a long time there's been a pendulum swings back and forth in education, and it says, hey, we need to really pay attention to vocations. We've got to have kids graduate with some skills. And then the pendulum swung to, hey, kids need to graduate, we need to focus on 4 core academic areas, and every kid's going to a 4-year university, and that's it. Now industry is telling us, hey, that's awesome. They're really book smart. They got no common sense. They don't know how to shake your hand and look you in the eye and understand that their word's supposed to mean something. They lie, cheat, and steal, and they can't work with people. So we appreciate that they're book smart, but we also need them to have a little common sense, and we need them to be employable. They're not employable. And so there's this tension between academics and workforce. Are we in a school system only about academic development? Are we a workforce development operation? Or do we need to pay attention to both and ensure that what we're producing is relevant, right? And at the end of the day, the community is going to tell us that. And they've been telling us that through our Profile of a Graduate project and through this most recent project that we're going to talk about today. The board has also said that, hey, we appreciate that you guys get up here and follow the law every year and provide a little summary report of state accountability. We shake our head and thank you guys, but at the end of the day, we want to spend just as the amount of time we have to comply, but then we want to open our books and look at a complete accounting of what we've been able to accomplish this year based on the goals that we've established. And we want you guys to report some findings, because based on those findings, we can come up with some plans to make some serious changes that matter. And so we took that charge, and over the course of this year thus far, we've done some work to kind of begin to really create that. And we've kind of been working in parallel to a project that the state is undertaking. We're one of, I believe, 44 districts that are part of the Texas Performance Assessment Consortium, which their whole charge, and John Tanner is the facilitator of that work in partnership with the Texas Association of School Administrators. The real focus of that is to say, hey, we've been complaining about the accountability system for a while as educators and saying it's not serving us well as a mechanism for meaningful change, much less a determiner of real quality. But instead of complaining about it alone, let's create something better, so that in the next legislative session we can complain about it and say, you should consider this. And so we're part of that work. And as we do that work at the state level, we decided it's too long to wait to the next session and to wait on the state to do something about the current accountability system to do right by our own local community. And so we engaged John in our own local effort to do the very same thing in a more personalized, central ECISD way. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Tanner, who can tell us a little bit about himself and then tell us a little bit about...
Let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
Before we start. Okay, and I'm going to read a little bit about those school districts in the Houston area, and then ask the state for a waiver for the STAR test. Is that strictly that area, or that affects the whole state? Do you have any insight on that?
I believe that that's the area that was affected by the storms, who were out of school for a period of time, that are asking for a waiver from state accountability.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you. This has been fun. I met a number of you. I'm fortunate in that I'm an expert on educational accountability. It sounds so unbelievably god-awful and boring, and there's a lot of people in it, but I think it's engaging and interesting. I moved to Texas 16 years ago. I live in San Antonio. If you know where LaFond-on-Main is, anybody know where LaFond-on-Main is? I live 3 blocks north of there, right in Mount Vista. As of 15 years ago, I moved to Texas, did no work in Texas. 10 years ago, no work in Texas. 5 years ago, no work in Texas. Worked all over. Last 5 years now, I'm spending half my time in Texas, and our organization is excited. Something's happened. Something's in the water. I mean, we're finally getting to the point where we're having meaningful conversations about this idea that we call true accountability for a while. We call it community-based accountability in Texas. It's exciting. This is for you. If I am boring you, if this is dull, if it doesn't work, holler at me. I can go faster or slower. I can stop and interrupt me, whatever you need, because I need this to be for you. But what I thought I would do at first is sort of level set. Help those of you who maybe have heard me speak at TASB or some other conferences, kind of maybe haven't heard me before, kind of get some level set so that we're all in agreement in terms of what the foundational aspects are of answering some basic questions. Why do we need community-based accountability? What is wrong with our current test-based system? I mean, not just it doesn't feel right, but you need to be able to explain it and talk about those kinds of things. What is it that we're really talking about here? What do we mean by true accountability? So let me see if I can do some level setting in that way. And then I'd like to dive into the work that you all have been engaged in. I think that's a useful way to sort of get into it. Is that right? Okay. So we'll start with this. What you guys are engaged in this true accountability effort is pretty amazing. I first wrote criticizing, I'm a testing person. Let me see this. So let me be really clear. I spent 20 years in educational measurement. I worked with test publishers. I've been a state test director, run foundations. I run a foundation now. I've spent my entire educational career in assessment and accountability. So this is an area that I know really well. We've been doing it wrong for a long time. And there's some reasons for it. There's a fundamental difference between true accountability that you guys are working on and what we've been doing. Let me see if I can show why with just a couple of slides. We started with exactly the wrong question when we started doing educational accountability all of these years ago. We started with this question, what do you want to measure? And everybody said that's the question we really need to begin with. And people like me were screaming and yelling and saying it's absolutely the wrong question. The right question is always, what do we want to accomplish? And the reason for that is really clear. We actually go so far as to say you can call that, starting with what you want to measure, you can call it accountability, but it isn't. If you start with what you want to measure, you risk never getting around to what you actually want to accomplish. That you're not even in the same ballpark. The example we use all the time is this. I can measure everything there is to know about light. I can measure its weight, and how bright the thing is. I can measure a million things about a light bulb, and I can explain it. But when I ask what do we want to accomplish, we're just not even on the same planet. In business and industry, a big part of where our research came from was we started looking at organizations that do accountability really well. And what we discovered is that every time we found an organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a business, or whatever, it starts with the question, what do we want to measure? They go out of business. It's failed. Every single time. It is the absolute wrong question to start with. The organizations that succeed wildly are the ones that start with this idea of what do we want to accomplish? And there are a lot of reasons for that. We started really looking at that. We started trying to figure out, well, what is, it feels different, it looks different, but why is that? And we started to realize a couple of things. We started to realize that when you think about what accountability is, and you think about an organization, which is got a lot of people, it's got some processes, it's got some systems. I probably need to change it. It looks a little like Westworld. I don't know if that's a good picture to have up there. But what we know is that organizations work really hard to produce some kind of benefit, value, or usefulness. And accountability is simply the degree to which that benefit, value, or usefulness occurred, tied back to the people, and what you're going to do next. It's really that simple. And if you make accountability about the benefit, if you make accountability about what do we want to accomplish, then you've got a great shot at heading in the right direction, or at least knowing where it is that you need to go. There's also something really important about this definition of accountability and talking about benefit, because if we think about a student, we think about the student sitting there at their desk, and we've got the past, the present, and the future, and we say, what do we want to accomplish? What we know is that it's our job to prepare that student for an uncertain future. That's our job. It's not even a question. It's not even debatable. And when you ask yourself, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Okay, we've got to prepare kids for this uncertain future. The problem is that when you start with what do we want to measure, and we think about this past which we know and this uncertain future, which the statistics are remarkable to me. The technologies that today's freshmen will walk into 3.5 years from now, because we're halfway through the school year, 3.5 years from now have not been invented nor conceived. It is going to be a 100% different technological world 3.5 years ago when those kids graduate from high school. I mean, the world is changing so rapidly. Not only is it uncertain, we can't even begin to know exactly what it's going to look like. That's our job, is to get these kids ready for that uncertain future. The problem with stuff we know is we know how to measure it. We have no idea how to measure, how to prepare kids for an uncertain future. And when you start then with this orientation of what do we want to measure, it automatically points you in the wrong direction. And so what our accountability programs all across this country have been doing for 25 plus years is pointing kids backwards, preparing kids for a world that hasn't existed for years, will never exist in the future, and doing so in a way that really is unhealthy. Because if we ask ourselves a really fundamental question, which is what are the consequences of a backward-facing accountability program, then instead of a forward-facing accountability program, the consequences are very, very real. And the answer is only going to be bright for a few. The answer is not going to be bright for all kids. The answer is only going to be bright for those kids that can pick up what they need to face that uncertain future outside the system. And we know that that comes primarily from households that have fairly robust economic circumstances. Those households are able to overcome this, but most are not. So if you want a system perfectly designed to separate out the haves and the have-nots and keep people in their place, we've designed it. That's exactly where we've been. And it's one of the reasons why the harder we work within these systems, the flatter the system has become. The data on this are just alarming. When you look both at national and data here in the state of Texas. If the future is only going to be bright for some, that certainly is not within the mission of our public educational system. So the idea of community-based accountability is this idea that says, what do we want to accomplish? What, if we're going to face forward, if we're going to look at uncertain futures, if we're going to get kids ready for that, that's what we need to accomplish. That's a far different kind of thing to accomplish than what we've been doing for a long time in the past. All right. We need to realize, and this is where things start to get confusing, and anytime you have accountability conversations, you cannot help but get a little bit technical. And I won't get too technical on you, but here's the way to think about it. Analysis and accountability are not the same thing. Those of you who are in business and industry will recognize this, I think, fairly easily. Here's an example. Let's think about literacy, and let's make that part. That's literacy. So just imagine in your head that's the amount of literacy that kids need in order to get out of school and to go be successful in life. Again, just think of it that way. And what we know is that some of that literacy is going to come from schooling, and some of that literacy is going to come from non-schooling. And the easiest way to explain that is if a child comes to us and can already read in kindergarten, that's a non-schooling effect. We didn't have anything to do with that. If a child comes to us and we teach the child to read, it's a schooling effect. We have a lot to do with that. And all kids, all learning is a combination of those two things, especially things like literacy. Kids don't stop speaking when they leave school. They don't stop learning when they leave school. And so we know that literacy comes from two places. And we know that It can either be a little or a lot that comes from school, or a little or a lot that comes from a non-schooling contribution, and that the number of resources in a community heavily influence where those sources are. So, the way that looks is we know that the wealthier a community, the more the non-schooling contribution tends to come in, the less the need from school would be to get a kid where he or she needs to be. The less wealthy a community, the more the school is going to have to contribute. The goal is to get all the amount of literacy. That just is some common sense. Now, that's a very complicated situation. Literacy is an extremely complicated thing for us to try to analyze. And we should analyze this. We should analyze it in lots and lots of ways. One of the ways we should analyze this is draw a line and say, where are kids now? I don't care why kids got what they got. I don't care that the student on the right got a ton of it from home and the student on the left didn't. None of that matters to me. I'm a teacher. What I need to know is what's our level of literacy today and where do I go? Don't care. I don't ask, oh, well, you learned that at school. Well, no, you learned that at home. Well, we're not going to pay attention to that. Does it make sense? Where you are is where you are. This is a beautiful way to analyze something as complicated as literacy because it tells us where we need to go from this point on. The problem with this is that you could never judge this. You could never draw the line in the sand and say, the student to the right is better than the student to the left. How can you say that? You cannot judge the school. You know, there's no judgment possible. If you try to make a judgment off of this analytical tool, you just corrupted it. And it seems rational. It seems, gosh, you know, I certainly couldn't do that. But what will happen is you'll judge something other than what's going on in schools, and that would be unfair. The school to the right that serves the student to the right is not a better school than the school to the left. You don't know that. It would be asinine and wrong. Asinine is a technical word we use all the time in accountability. You should put it in your vocabulary. It's really a good bad joke, right? That was funny. Sorry, I'll remind you when I make my jokes. They're all terrible, and I have 3 of them, so I got 2 more. So, but it's fine to invite the cocktail parties. But it's really important to realize you can't judge the school to the right as a better school. If you try to take something, and we're pretending there's no test, we're not even worried about the test right now. If you have a legitimate way to measure the amount of literacy that exists at a particular moment in time, just because a child has more of it than another child, or a school seems to have a lot of kids who have more of it than another school, you cannot make a judgment. You will be judging something other than what's actually going on in school. Beautiful analytical tool corrupts immediately when you try to use it for accountability. It's fine to look at progress against a benchmark and say, gosh, we need all kids to get to some particular point or be at some particular point by a particular point in time. Do it. You should analyze it. And that was very important. But this one risks incredible corruptions because if you start to try to make accountability judgment, if you start to try to see quality in this, you risk looking at the student to the right, or the school to the right, and saying, you are a much higher quality school than the school to the left. When, if 80% of the kids in the school to the left made the benchmark, and 80% of the kids in the school to the right made the benchmark, the school to the left did a better job. The school to the left is a better school. It added more value to kids' lives. It did things that were great. But if you just trying to use this as a crude judgment tool, you're going to judge the school to the right as being, in all probability, better than the school to the left. Again, perfectly legitimate way for us to analyze something really complicated like literacy, perfectly inappropriate judgment tool. It corrupts when you apply accountability to it. Movement of student surveys is growth. Okay, we gotta get growth in there. Because kids grow and, by God, we ought to be able to hold schools accountable for growth, except that growth doesn't occur that way. Growth occurs this way. Growth occurs both inside and outside of school. It occurs because of school and non-school classes. And we have no physical possible way to separate out the classes. The problem with this is it's even more uncertain. Since we have no idea where the growth comes from, to somehow award a school credit for growth, or to assign, to get mad at them for not seeing it, there's too much imprecision in this for us to use it for accountability purposes. Perfectly legitimate analytical tool. We ought to analyze this. We ought to look at this. We ought to spend a lot of time on this kind of stuff. But perfectly inappropriate, and it corrupts the instant you try to move to an accountability thing. If you use good analytical tools and you try to use them for accountability, you will create a biased model. In this case, the model that we use in schools values what fluent schools schools already have. The way you will succeed in the model that's been currently given to us is be a wealthy school. You're going to be fine. This is true all over the country. It's true in all of the systems. Because you can see how much less energy is going to be required in a community with additional resources to meet the goals and to do the work the ones to the left. It does not mean that the school to the right is a better school. It does not mean that the school to the left is a worse school. Those are both bogus judgments. You can't say that. In all probability, that may be the case. It may be just the opposite. We can't know. But then what we do is we say, okay, for you schools that are poor, we'll give you a crapshoot. We'll throw this growth thing in, but it's so precise, it really is like rolling the dice and good luck. So if the dice happen to land for you the right way, then you're going to be fine this year. If not, well, good luck next year. This is bias. There's no other way for us to talk about this. And people like me who research this and look at this stuff, and screamed and yelled about this kind of bias in the system for years. Nobody listened to us. I mean, nobody. Until the last 5 years. And the world's starting to pay attention, and it's wonderfully exciting. But, as we talked about, it's one thing to say this is a bad system, it's another thing to start to try to figure a way out of it. One of the things we talk a lot about are bias models. I'll talk about a couple of them just for fun. To make sure that you understand why this idea of, how this idea of bias can corrupt things in some really strange ways. Anybody here know about World War II, not World War II, but the pilots in the 50s when they were first starting to fly jets? Are you aware of the mortality rates of pilots? Incredible. I mean, they could not figure out how to keep these pilots alive. And what they realized they had done is they took a whole bunch of people and they figured out an average person, and an average man, and they made the pilot seat for the average man. Perfectly logical, right? Guess how many average men there actually were in the Air Force? 0. By going to the average, they made a seat that fit nobody. And by making a seat that fit nobody, it was an incredibly dangerous situation to get in one of those planes and fly. As soon as they made a seat that was adjustable, that fit everybody, mortality rates went down. Exactly a reasonable way. That is an incredibly biased, an incredibly bad type of model. Instant photographs. I love this one. I love it. It's a horrible example. When Polaroids first came out, if you had skin that looked like mine, you got lovely pigments. If you had skin that looked Hispanic or much darker, they forgot to put those pigments in the film. Didn't exist. You'd wash out and you couldn't see the person. Because the model that they used was those people. The people were so quiet, so close-minded, they couldn't see that people other than ginger redheads wanted to have a picture taken. Text creation, okay, you all know this. This is personal. See this? Keyboard, right? That's a perfectly legitimate keyboard for all people, right? Wrong, I can use it. One-handed, left-handed people use this thing. It's called a Maltron keyboard. You could never type on this thing. It is designed to be a one-handed, left-handed keyboard. The keys are HETA. See, it's HETA. It's not a QWERTY keyboard. I had to completely relearn. I lost mine when I was a little kid, so I don't remember what it's like to have it. But I can tell you that I can type about 95 to 100 words a minute on this thing. I've written books. I live on these things. I have a couple of them. This is a perfectly legitimate model if you're a left-handed, one-handed person. It is a horrible model if you are a right-handed, one-handed person. If you are my wife, who needs to get on the computer once in a while and can't find the other keyboard that goes with it, and watch her hunt and peck, and you hear the words come from her mouth, you know you've got a bad model. This is the problem. Models, we have to be very careful because they bias very, very quickly when they don't. Your accountability model cannot automatically favor a person or group or another, and that's exactly what they have done for the last 25 to 30 years. When we go from a model that is biased to a model that is no longer biased, a lot of people will accuse us of saying, you're watering down the system. You're making the system less robust, or whatever the word is. That is just bogus. These systems, because we make the system more meaningful for more people, doesn't water it down. If you customize the fit for everybody, you've watered nothing down. You've actually created a much richer, much more meaningful environment. And the thing about this, we really thought, when we made this discovery, we really thought, well, can we find ways that organizations get better at accountability. We thought it would be very complicated. It's not. It's so simple. All they do to get better accountability is they move towards a more meaningful outcome. When they find that an outcome is not working, when you say, gosh, we did valid analyses of literacy trends and data, we corrupted them into generic accountability judgments that are biased, that don't fit very many kids, that as Roland said, an A school is not really an A school because not every kid is an A student, and these are really strange. It's so easy to make them more meaningful. What does this student need to gain the benefit of an education, to think about that future? It's not a particularly difficult thing. So as I listen to you guys talk about the systems that you hope to build and create, this is exactly what you're doing. You were doing this before I got here. You were already thinking about this. I can help with the vocabulary, I can help with the research, but you guys were already thinking about how we do this, and I think that's marvelous. I think student benefit is just, that's what it's about. It's about the kids, not about the adults. I have to talk about testing for a minute. I won't bore you too long, but here's something that I hope you can all learn to say, and I hope you can all learn to talk to your community about. The biggest fallacy in the world is that we think test scores signal quality. It is 100% completely wrong to think that high test scores signal a good school and low test scores signal a bad school. That's counterintuitive, right? That's not how I thought about it. I still have a hard time thinking about it. I mean, I do this for a living, and I still have a hard time thinking about this. But I promise you that just because the school has high test scores or low test scores, it has nothing to do with quality. It never has, it never will. That is a bias that we put on it. And the reason was we would drive by a school in Allen Heights and it would look clean, and we'd say, that looks like a nice place, and they have high test scores. And we drive by a school on the south side, I live in San Antonio, SD, and we see some of the poor schools there, and that's a bad school, and it has low test scores, and we made this confirmation bias. We said, well, test scores are signaling quality. That's just completely wrong. That's not what they're doing. Let me show you what that is. State testing, all it does, all these kinds of instruments do, is order kids from the furthest below average to the furthest above average. They do that by taking test items that half kids are going to answer correctly and incorrectly. How many of you are aware of this? This is by show of raise your hands. Can I just see? Okay. Here's how this works. I'm going to find a test item. It'll divide you in half. You guys get it right. You guys get it wrong. What I just did is I identified one step in this idea of average. You're above average, you're below average. I could demonstrate this if I had you stand up and line up from the shortest person over there to the tallest person over there. It's the exact same thing. I would have, there you would be, you would line yourselves up, you would find the person that's a little taller or shorter than you. You would line yourselves up, and as soon as you've done that, I now have all the information I need to create a statistical data set and to analyze how. That's all I need. I can find middle, or average in the middle. It'll be pretty consistent over time. And most importantly, I'll be able to identify patterns. Now, if I do that by height, I'm going to see that men are a little bit taller than women for the most part. That's not a pattern I need to disrupt. But if I could order kids, as cruel as it sounds, if I could order kids based on their literacy acquisition lifetime to date, might I see a pattern in there that I need to disrupt? Yeah. I see the poor kids who don't, for the most part, have the same level of literacy acquisition as rich kids. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to disrupt it. That's my job. That's now our job, to find those patterns and to disrupt them. So the reason that Curl and people like me give kids tests is because these kind of tests is we want to see kids ordered in that fashion. We'll do that by asking kids an item. You'll get it right, you'll get it wrong. We come up with a second item. Do it again. 2 right, 1 wrong, both wrong. A third item. And it just starts to create this ordering effect, exactly as if I were to line people up based on relative height. That's the reason that we build these tests. We're not trying to be jerks. We're not trying to be mean. We're trying to be able to sense and identify patterns that we can't see any other way. And then we want to be able to see if we're disrupting those patterns over time. We never meant, in fact, people like me are just sick about this, that anybody would ever assume that just because a student is well above average, that that is a better student than a student who is well below average. That's bogus. That's not in the judgment. The only thing we know is where a student is. We don't know why that student is there. A student may be in the middle of the pack because of really great teaching. A student may be up here because they're lazy and they have two parents who are professors. Or it's my 16-year-old. It's just another, it's a second joke. The point of this is you can stop me and I can explain it. But when you have kids and you can spread them out and you can see who's below average and above average, that's a useful tool, but a very limited tool. My gosh, the limits of interpretation on this are extraordinary. It's a zero-sum game. Somebody's always going to be above average and somebody's always going to be below average. That's okay. Now, think about this. If I'm in a classroom, I would never use this kind of test in a classroom. Because if you all learned it, and you all answer the question correctly, I should be happy about that. I've done my job. If you all miss it, I should be annoyed with you, or myself. We need to do it again. But in a zero-sum game, no, I'm not going to do that. If all of you answer the question correctly, I'm going to throw it out in my game. Because I'm building a zero-sum game. I'm not trying to even understand learning. I'm trying to analyze something really complicated like literacy or numeracy. And until I go look behind why the student is where he or she is on one of these instruments, I can't know why, therefore I can't judge it, I can't do anything with it. Everybody argues with me on this. They say, but it's content, it comes from standards. And I say, it's statistics. We don't keep items in these tests because they're good content. We only keep items in these kinds of tests because the statistics match what we're looking for. We will jettison every single item that doesn't match within a very narrow set of parameters. So it doesn't have anything to do with the content. I mean, it doesn't
So
really
to clarify, John, the test items that are intentionally selected are test items that have been vetted to roughly guarantee that half the test takers are going to get it right and half the test takers are going to get it wrong.
Yes. And
By design.
all the time. And every STAR test does it. You can look and they release the data. You need to realize that the magic number is actually 63%. Okay, this is my boring technical, right, here's why. Because they're multiple choice, and so you guys were getting them right for the most part. I hate to do this, but YouTube guessed, right? So you guys guessed, and so actually the magical number that statisticians need is 63% of the kids to get them correct, 37% to get them wrong. And every single STAR test that has ever been given, the percentage of kids, the average getting items correct, is 63%. Bar none, every single one. And by the way you know that is if the results are stable from one year to the next, that's how you know you're in this kind of test line, because averages are stable from one year to the next. Okay? If we were actually interested in learning, we would see that one year 80% of the kids learn the material, the next year 60% or 30%. And we wouldn't even balk at that. It would just, well, we had a bad year, we need to think about that. But that'll never happen in this kind of test because the statistics are designed to not let it.
But what sense does that make? We want our students to be successful, yet we're purposely failing them. Or half, what?
37%.
37%, yeah, failing.
I can't say anything better than you said. That's exactly right. That's why it's so irrational that we ever built accountability using these kinds of instruments. It's absolutely right. It should make you mad.
It does. I mean, it makes no sense to me. It is, why do we continue?
Because I used to tell this third joke, and it's really dumb. I used to say, well, you know, why did the guy beat himself with a quality hammer? It's because it felt so good when he stopped. See, you're not laughing. You're funny people, I suppose. I'm not a joke. But you're right, and it's why you've got to build something local. It's why you've got to build something here, because the system as it's set up isn't designed for all kids to go be successful. In fact, I'll show you. Think of it this way. If I order kids who can see patterns, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But what if I draw a line in the sand and say you got to pass this thing? Well, wait a minute. It's a zero-sum game. Can everybody be successful in this system? No. Can everybody be above average? Math people? No. Can't average. So it doesn't. We've set up a system where not everybody can win, not everybody can succeed, and the system is gained against those kids whose literacy acquisition and numeracy acquisition lags their wealthier populace. And again, just because you serve a population that has not had all the privileges of a wealthier population does not mean the population is dumber or less. In fact, that's just asinine and stupid. It means you have different challenges. It means that you have different responsibilities when it comes to those kids. So if you try to judge in the system, you're going to be making a judgment without knowing why. So let's say that you've got a kid who's slightly above average, and you say this is a great kid and this kid passes. How do you know that? This may be a horrible child. I mean, this is where I can make a judgment. This may be my 17-year-old. See, you got 17-year-olds, so you know. But we don't know why the kid is there. And for us to judge is just ridiculous. The student who is well below average, I tell this all the time. I get to work with a district in Alabama. It's the poorest district in America. 30% of their kids are homeless. They graduate these kids every year. These kids go on and they're able to be successful. They can't catch them up. Not as far behind as these kids are, but they leave them on the right trajectory. And the kids go out and learn and do great things. But they never cross that average line. That's not what the test is designed to do. It's designed for us to see a pattern that we then need to go track. Okay, so that's what I'll say about tests other than they just have led to invalid judgments. I can tell you, I can predict where you will be on any accountability program by looking at your demographic data. And I'll be right most of the time. And we might as well just do that, shut the door on it, and be done. They're just invalid judgments. And again, without any evidence for either. But because the system confirms what policymakers think about schools, policymakers have said, well, let's just go with it. Policymakers believe their kids' schools are good, their kids' schools have high test scores, therefore the system works. Those other people who live out in the boondocks, east of San Antonio, they may not be quite so wealthy and their schools shouldn't therefore do so well. We're happy. It's a confirmation bias. It has nothing to do with reality. It's focus. I said earlier about learn versus not learn, and the above versus below average. These are two different ways that we need to discriminate in schools, but we should never get the two of them confused. And I can spend some time on that later if you like. All right, I'm almost through the setting the foundation. The other thing that's important to realize about community-based accountability, and that's important about true accountability, is it's not a reporting system. Okay? People have long thought about accountability as well as a report card. It's if we just vomit enough information onto a sheet of paper, somehow everything will change and be for the better. We have proven over and over again that that's not true. There was a guy named Elihu Goldratt. Anybody here in manufacturing? Okay. Elihu Goldratt, famous in 1984, for saying this, give a bajillion for arguing that we need to stop thinking about asking the question, what do we first want to measure, and first ask, what do we want to change? What do we want to change to, and how do we accomplish it? In our work we have, how do we do? We need to get that piece in. Goldratt is brilliant, and what Goldratt pointed out is he said that metrics can help inform the what do we change. That's fine. But that accountability always fails if it isn't placed on what do we change to, how do we accomplish it, and how did we do? It's really interesting the way that educational accountability picked the one place in this, in what Goldratt talked about, that almost guaranteed that the system as it exists will not be able to succeed. Accountability is just metrics of all the matters that are higher rising test scores. I can get there by cheating, I can get there by doing good things, and it won't matter. Either way is fine. A correct solution is just as good as a valid one, and that to me is really problematic. So this leads us to this idea of, we don't even call what we have accountability. We call what currently goes on in states non-accountability versus true accountability. And where we're making tons of progress is we're not coming in and saying we hate state accountability. We're saying it's not accountability. And as educators, we will be accountable. We will be far more accountable than you could ever ask us to be, or you've ever asked us to be, because we believe that we should and ought to be accountable for the quality of our decisions. To start diving into the work that we've been doing. TPAC is, we just changed the name. It's currently the Texas Performance Assessment Consortium. We've just changed it to Texas Public Accountability Consortium to keep TPAC, but to more aptly name it. TPAC is an organization that was founded a year ago. It will start its second year. It's the only organization in the country that has a significant population in a state, educational population in a state, asking this fundamental question: what should accountability look like? How do we create this? How do we invent this thing? We're not asking the state for a waiver. We're not asking for anything. We're saying that we can build a better system and run it alongside the state. And we think that's the way to go. We think that the evidence after a year or so will be on our side. Just for what it's worth, we have major research organizations all over the country that are starting to get involved. I think it's growing. We're in 43 districts. We've had another 40 inquire about coming on board this next year. And this is getting really, really exciting. Alabama and Georgia are both starting movements similar to this one. Other states are going to come on board very quickly. Let me show you how this thing works, because unless you dive right into the details to show you the structure of this thing, I'm not going to try to give you the history of how we got there. That's it. I'm not going to make you look at that. But this is what we call a pillar. And what will happen is within your community-based accountability effort, you're going to have 6 to 7 of these big pillars that you will use to drive accountability here at East Central. There's lots of parts to this, so I'll break it apart to make it a little bit easier so that it doesn't hurt your eyes. And you've got a picture of it. Page, I don't have my glasses. 4, I think that's it. In there. And you've got a little bit more description of that. This is a draft document. We're still working on this, but we wanted you to at least see it tonight. Up top, you have what's called a pillar function. This is where you answer that question. What are we trying to accomplish? This is not about you trying to say to a parent, well, what do you think schools should do? Parents don't know. But if you ask a parent, what should our school accomplish? What are your hopes and dreams for your child? What do we need to contribute as a school in terms of those hopes and dreams? You ask a kid, what do you hope to get out of your education? What do you expect schools to be able to contribute? Ask the community, what are your hopes and dreams for your business and for our community? And what do schools need to contribute? People can answer those questions. The answers are beautiful. And so that's what a pillar function is. What is this pillar trying to do? A pillar function would be something like safety and well-being, learning and achievement, post-secondary readiness. These are the big chunks of school. But among the 7 to 8, you'll cover the entire school. You'll cover everything. Finance, everything can go into a pillar. So that you're not just being accountable for one narrow little thing, you're being accountable for everything about the school. We break that into sub-pillars so that it becomes very easy to see and to communicate what you're doing, what you're talking about. That 5 or 6 of those sub-pillars, you can talk about them in sound bites, you can speak to them in your community, you can memorize them, you can chant them at board meetings. But what it will allow you to do is when somebody says, what are you working on right now? You can answer the question and say, this is what we're focused on, this is what we're trying to do. These pieces going left to right. Notice it says, it's kind of small print, determined with community stakeholders. Key questions are how you draw one of these pillars. What are the questions that need to be answered in order to prove that you are being accountable in a positive and healthy way for what's in that pillar? And those questions are something that are incredibly important. There can be a few of them, there can be a lot of them. They can change over time, they will change over time. You'll get better at this, at asking the questions, you'll cut some out, that's fine. This is supposed to be very much something that can ebb and flow over time. You have metrics and indicators, the next little blue piece. Metrics and indicators are incredibly important. That's how you answer the key questions. What's really important about the key questions is no key question, not one. I've tried it, I've looked at the ones you've built so far. Not one can be answered with one piece of evidence. Every single one of them needs to be answered with multiple pieces of evidence. So no more is this going to be coming and sitting down and saying, well, how are our test scores? Wrong. What key questions are we trying to talk about? What metrics, what indicators do we need? I'll tell you, you're going to need to gather some teacher judgments. You're going to need to gather teacher opinions. You're going to need to talk to your minority communities. You're going to need to talk to the advocates in your community who advocate for those folks. There are lots of these key questions that you need to come up with, and there are lots of metrics and indicators that you'll need to gather. This does not mean you have to go out and become researchers and gather all kinds of empirical data. Teacher judgment, asking a teacher their opinion about whether a child learned is the most valuable piece of information you can gather. And it's a perfectly legitimate one to figure in depending on the key question. To the right, you'll see what we call an accounting or communications plan, because this is where you say, here's when we'll talk about this, here's how we'll talk about this, here's where we'll talk about this. So that you make sure that this is something being done very much in the public light. This is that middle part. If you look at the whole thing here, this middle part here, but it's easier to see if we kind of break it out. This is what we call the change engine. A community-based accountability system is not a reporting system. It is an engine of change. It is an engine that will force you as a district, whether you like it or not, to change in meaningful ways. I like that. I think that's great. I've done work, I did work in your district for the first time 3 years ago, and I can tell you that meaningful change is exactly what school leadership is about. Schools are constantly evolving, there's constant craziness, there's just all kinds of things going on. So the change engine is at the heart of the pillar. It works this way, and it's really simple, and you guys will get to learn the vocabulary and you'll get really good at doing this. You provide an accounting. An accounting is simply an objective, non-judgmental analysis of how are we doing? How can we answer this question? You'll develop findings, which are, and both of those steps are done publicly. They're done with you guys and with the community. So that we say, yes, these are the findings that matter. We find that this needs to change to that. We find that over here we need to make some adjustments and so on. Maybe a finding is to preserve it, leave it alone for a year. There's not much we can do with it. That's fine. But once you come up with those findings, and once you've got some consensus around those findings within that pillar, now you plan your change. The school leaders will sit down and work through that process. What is this change going to look like? What's the timeline? What's the timetable? All of those kinds of things. They'll make the public aware of what they're doing. So that again, this becomes an outwardly facing activity, not just an inwardly facing activity. And then implementation and evidence review are performed within the school. It's let's go, let's work, let's have our milestones, let's figure some things out, but let's make sure that we're reviewing evidence as often as we can to understand where we need to adjust and so on. At some point, that will feed back into another accounting. At which point in time there may be an additional finding. And it may be, we blew it. We really thought and believed in what we were doing. We're going to adjust. We're going to move on from that. We're not having the effect that we want. Or it was brilliant. It worked better than we ever expected it to work. Whatever it is, that's fine. And then the process just keeps on moving itself along, keeps on churning in this constant flow of change over time. That becomes then the engine of your change. The 2 points that you will need to adopt as a board, and this is, by the way, this is something you get to decide. This is not dictated. This isn't some system that came down from on high. But the ones that we recommend you adopt are the pillar function and the subpillars. And the reason for that is that the key questions are so powerful. But what's powerful is they can adjust. If someone comes to a board meeting and says, within this pillar, you forgot about X, Y, and Z, you don't want to have to stop, hold a vote, make change. You want to be able to say, got it, Roland, you got it? Yes, we're good. And those key questions now become part of the system. So to adopt the key question, we think is premature. We adopt the pillar function, we adopt the subpillars. And in that way, you adopt the right pieces. But all of you then adopt the language and adopt the system and adopt this as a methodology for moving your system forward. And we can talk a lot more about this if you want to. You've built 2 pillars already. There's a third one that's there. Here's the first pillar that your community built. And it's post-secondary planning and execution. And they said, what your community said was, here is the function of that pillar. It is to prepare, what do we want to accomplish? This is answering the question. It's to prepare ECISD students for citizenship, gainful employment, and success in future studies, and to ensure that kids are real world ready. That's what you said, this is what we want this pillar to accomplish. Great. You then said, the community then said, after we went through a whole number of meetings and it was really fun work, these are the sub-pillars that we care about. We care that every child is ready to make a meaningful living. Very important to us. The folks were very clear that they want kids to walk out of school, not just ready to have a job, but have a career. And these kinds of subtleties are so important, so critical. They said post-secondary planning and execution is very important. If kids don't start planning on that early, we've missed our chance. They got to be ready for citizenship, they got to be ready for college, and we want to know the gaps. We want all to meet all. We don't just want to know who's graduating, we want to know who's not graduating and why. We want to know what patterns there are. We want to know that all really does meet all. This is what you guys identify as saying that's what we want to do, that pillar to consist of. There's a ton of work to do with it. And when you look at the key questions, you start to realize just how rich this particular piece is. But everything about post-secondary planning and execution fits into that. The way you start is to look at one of those pillars and say, let's come up with a finding. And maybe the finding is, we don't know what we're doing on this. Great, that's a legitimate finding. Make a plan. What are we going to do? We're going to figure it out. We're going to learn. We're going to grow. We're going to develop. There is nothing that says, you know, you have to hit the ground running and look great coming out of the starting. It means you simply get going. It may be that your plan change is to put data systems in place that you don't now have. It may be that I can go on and on and on, but it becomes this marvelous engine of change that starts to move you in the right direction. The second one that you guys did was quality and commitment of staff. And you said, what do we want to accomplish? We want to ensure for our community the highest quality workers to provide the best possible student outcomes for the East Central community. And you said the sub-pillars that you cared about there were teacher and staff impact on students. I thought that was really interesting how much people prioritize that. Character of the teacher and staff, the training and development of those teachers and the staff, the empowerment of all of them to make sure that they know that they are empowered to work with and our kids. They said it's imperative that these teachers relate to the kids in a meaningful way, and lastly, that they be qualified. But I think that was interesting. In most of these systems, number one is staff qualifications. And your community said, well, that's just that's the barrier to entry. But what we really care about is, are they having an impact on kids? All right, I'm going to turn this over to questions for a minute, but what I want to talk about for the very last, what will be exciting for you guys as you put this in place is this idea of a renewed social contract between the East Central schools and the community. The social contract is a concept that is, I think, just incredibly important to what we're doing here. A social contract is when a group of citizens give up some number of rights for something better. In the case of public schooling, we give up the rights to have our kids at home, maybe have our kids on the farm, if we're thinking about the old country school tradition. We give up resources, and we do it for a benefit. And we expect that benefit to be something along the lines of our kids walk out able to meet the profile of a graduate. That social contract is really a wonderful way for you to think about what it is you're involved in. Because what's happened is that that social contract was broken down when states tried to take that responsibility on. And what you guys are doing is you guys are grabbing on that and saying, nope, this social contract is something that we're going to own. And it can only be owned at a community level. It's not a liberal or conservative argument, it's a legal politics. It has to do with this notion that the social contract between a community and its public schools is one of the most important ideas of democracy, and one of the things that we argue is we've gotten away from that. So we're really pushing and really excited that you made a decision to go in a very different direction. So that's my lowest thing. I'll shut up. I'll let you talk. And see what kind of questions you have. This is drinking from a fire hose for a lot of you. I know that. But what kinds of questions, concerns, thoughts, interests can we start a little bit of a discussion? And then I've got some activities that I want you to go through in a minute because we need your feedback specific to the pillar work that's been done. I won't make any more jokes either, I promise.
Let me ask you, why can't you make a judgment on a bad school and a good school?
You absolutely should judge schools as good, but you should judge them based on evidence of their goodness or badness. So if let's pick a school, and let's say we've got a leadership team, and we come up with a whole bunch of findings. We say, boy, this needs to change that. And over the years, we see the changes not being made. We need to suggest that we're not seeing the quality of effort that we need to. But now we have evidence in order to say that school is not where it is to be. Or we have a school that we come up with a whole bunch of findings, and they start to go to work, and what we see is evidence over the next couple of years that their efforts are having the effect that we wanted. And in cases where they weren't, they were willing to make changes and adjust and say, whoa, we blew it on that. That's a quality school. So what we have to do is we must judge schools. They're too important. Our kids are too important. But we should judge them based on evidence not based on whether they're relatively wealthy or relatively poor school, which is what we do. We absolutely must judge schools. We must judge the quality. It's going to be your responsibility as a board to assign those kinds of judgments. But at the same time, no school is an entirely good school, and no school is an entirely bad school. I mean, every school I go into, you've got great things happening and horrible things happening. You've got things that should change. You've got lessons to be learned. And a quality leadership team is one who considers all of that, knows that, focuses on their weaknesses, relies on their strengths, and so on and so forth. It's just not as different as saying you're an F and you're an A. And this system allows you to be sensitive in that regard.
So you believe it's good teachers and bad teachers, and a good math teacher, or you would say all teachers are good teachers? I saw an ineffective teacher and an effective teacher.
Sure.
So if you switch it and put it at the low performance school, what do you think would happen now, you know, with the effective teacher and ineffective teacher?
It's a great
Just vice versa, you know?
It's a great question. Let me do it. Let me answer it this way.
Okay.
Of course there are ineffective teachers. Of course there are effective teachers. There are brilliant speakers who can tell jokes, and there are not so brilliant ones who can't. That's just life. See, you're not even laughing at that. But there are bad teachers. There are bad employees. That happens. There's ineffectiveness. Accountability as a system, when it is handled properly in organizations, is not about weeding out bad people. It is about creating incentive to be good, and when that can't occur, finding a way for that person to exit. That's how accountability works. So it's not, I think in schools what we started doing is we started saying, oh, well, they're just bad teachers. And I think if we looked at an organization and said, they're just bad employees, I don't know of any company that would ever say, God, our employees suck. They're terrible. You know, we just got bad people. But so I think it's inappropriate for us to do that in schools. I think this kind of system gives you an opportunity to honestly identify who needs help, what help they need, provide that help, and if they can't, which some will not be able to, find a way to exit from gracefully. But I don't think it's fair to somehow just say, you know, we expect 10% of our teachers to be bad teachers or something. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I can understand that. Let's say, take a sample of Alamo High students and take a sample of a local performance school and just switch those students out. Okay, and if we see a change in the kids that went from the local performance school to Alamo High, what would you think that would be?
Okay, there's actually a way to do that study.
Yeah.
What you do is you get somebody who's really good at math and statistics, and what they can do is they can take a child, theoretically, and take them out of an elementary school here, and ask the question, take all the demographics, everything we know about that child, and put them into Alamo Heights, again, theoretically, and ask the question, is the student likely to do better in Alamo Heights, worse in Alamo Heights, or about the same? That kind of study allows you to see whether the sending school is doing a good job, because if they were to go to Alamo Heights and do worse, the school's probably doing a pretty reasonable job. About the same, no difference. But if the student were to go to Alamo Heights and do much better, then you could say, oh, well, the sending school probably needs to pick it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That research is totally good. Now, here's what we know when that research is done. A schools, or schools that get A's in these grading systems, tend to do a very poor job with poor children. You take those poor kids out of this school and put them into that A school, they have a tendency to do worse. The sending school does better. We know that when you take a lot of those very wealthy kids out of an Alamo Heights and put them anywhere, they're fine. There's no difference. They're not succeeding or failing because of the school, it's more for other things. So we know it's not a simple thing to say, I mean, we could not succeed by simply taking all the Alamo Heights teachers and putting them in another district. That's not, we know through research that's not going to do it.
That wouldn't do it.
No.
I think the big thing we're trying to overcome is making that judgment based on just the test. So if we say Alamo Heights is a good school based on STAR, and school B is not good based on STAR when you compare the two, it's an invalid conclusion.
Right.
He just said the test they took was unfortunately going to be predictable based on socioeconomic or levels of wealth.
Right.
Right? It's just the way that it's biased towards. So it's a piece of information that we could use to determine patterns that we might want to disrupt, but we need a lot more information to determine how effective a teacher was or a student was at learning or a school is at impacting learning. Very similarly, if you have a coach who goes 0-10, from a distance you might say, that's a terrible coach. But you know as well as I do, it might mean they're a terrible coach, but you need a lot more information to decide beyond just the win-loss record if it's a good coach or a bad coach. Because you've also seen 9-1 and 10-0 coaches that aren't very good in a lot of different ways, and you probably wouldn't want them teaching your kid. But the 0-10 you'd love to. So we need a lot more information, a more complete portfolio or accounting, so we can make decisions based on what we really found. Because if we just look at the test, we're going to say, my God, we're a terrible school if we look at it compared to the same test on the same day to Alamo Heights.
Gotcha.
And Alamo Heights is going to say, man, we're awesome.
Yeah.
And their special ed kids or their English language learners or their kids from poverty might not get any additional attention because we did great.
I'll give you the classic example. I'll go back to this district in Alabama. So this 30% homeless. His kids do terrible on standardized test scores because his kids are graduating 3 to 4 years behind their peers in literacy and numeracy. He can't catch them. He catches them up as much as he can. But he teaches these kids how to be on the right trajectory when they leave. So these kids are going out. They're going to college. They're taking 6 years to graduate. But that's because they've got so much catching up to do. But they're graduating. They're going out and being successful business people. He's done a good job of creating the arguments as to why every year the state tries to shut him down, he has to get a waiver. He says, but I can show you. It may look like I'm 0-10. I'm way better than 0-10. But it's because he has built a community-based, community-focused accountability program that allows him to make the true claim. And the true claim is that he is not failing his kids, he is saving their lives. But just from the test score perspective, he looks like the worst school in the country. And that would be like saying you're bad because you're poor. Nobody's bad because they're poor. That's ridiculous. That doesn't make sense. Anybody else with questions or thoughts about what I pushed at you? That's a lot of information kind of in a short period of time to digest. You'll be engaged with this stuff a lot over the next couple of years. Anybody else?
Well, I was just kind of curious. I see to date our school district has worked on 3 of the pillars, and I'm looking at the pillars, and I recognize that this is kind of a work in progress, maybe a living document, if you will.
Yes.
And so I guess what my question is, maybe I don't have enough information right now to ask the best question, but how much involvement, how much time does this take as we look at these? And when you have something that's a work in progress and a living document, you obviously have to always be looking at that and tweaking that and making sure that the outcome that you decided that you wanted, what you wanted to get from this, that you're on target. So I guess I just want to have just kind of an idea of what this really in reality looks like. Sure. in a 9 to 5 or in a day or whatever for the week or what does this look like?
So this is a really good question. It looks a lot like what you're doing right now. Here's why. You're already changing every day. I mean, the only constant in a school district is change. It's happening in spite of you. It's happening in front of your nose. But that change is not aligned with necessarily all of the various metrics and measures out there. So if you think about this, if you think about being a principal let's say a principal in a very impoverished school, just as an example, and you've got great teachers, and you know that you're saving kids' lives every day. You know you're doing a fabulous job. You know and have to know exactly what your teachers are doing. And the state is coming to you and saying you're a terrible school, and you've got to behave as if all these kids are failures, and you've got to get your test scores up or else. You start to get all these contradictory messages. And what winds up happening is then decisions have a tendency to be made that are not necessarily in the best interests of the kids. And change may start to occur in saying, all right, we'll spend 6 weeks on test prep because I don't want to get in trouble anymore. That's terrible. Test prep is the worst thing you can do for a child ever. And all of a sudden, you put this principal in this very contradicting environment. That principal is constantly changing, that principal is constantly making decisions, but that principal is not able to make decisions in an aligned fashion at that point. All this does, and I say all, but it's really important, is it gets all of that aligned around the right goals and against the right perspectives. It doesn't ask that principal to try to serve these two masters. It doesn't say, think about test scores, but think about the kids at the same time, and that's difficult to do. And this is funny, you can say on the one hand or on the other, but I think that's positive. And that's funny, and you know. See, I know, you appreciate that. But what it does is that principal is making hundreds of decisions every day. That principal is making thousands of decisions across the year. But right now, they're being made and pulled in lots of different directions. What a community-based accountability system does is aligns those with what the community wants and needs. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So in terms of time, this requires some discipline, but this should not add to someone's day. This should not add to, I mean, the idea of this is not to put another program on top of it. The idea is to do what you're doing now better, more efficiently, etc. You're the one that gets dimpled with this, but that's what we've talked about. Is that sort of how you understand it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
I can see the
Dale,
value.
so as a principal in the school district, I would look at these pillars and, you know, previous to us having these pillars, I would look at state accountability test as one of the only judgments of my impact. And it doesn't measure anything about post-secondary planning and execution, which our community said is really important for our children. Like, we want to prepare all of our students for citizenship. That's not on the test. Gainful employment. That's not on the test. And success in future studies. That's not on the test either. And we want to ensure kids are real world ready. Whether they pass STAR or not, we don't know anything about whether we actually accomplished this. You see what I'm saying? But now as a principal, I know where the community doesn't say anything about test prep the kids to do better on the biology end of course. It's saying that one of the things that we need to focus on is this. So then, how would I know if I'm doing that, and what kind of things might I need to do differently in my school to ensure that every child is real world ready, that every child is ready to succeed in future studies? Like, what are future studies? Is it just college? Is it trade school? Is it certification preparation, right, for industry? I mean, there's a lot of things now that I begin to think about in order to meet the demands of my community. And then I can begin to look at the questions or think about the questions I need to answer in order to prepare an accounting for the board, like about the degree to which we actually did this, and or not. And then based on that, we can make decisions about what we actually need to do more of or less of. Or, so it's going to drive our decisions in a much richer manner. It's going to drive our improvement efforts. It's going to help us make better decisions about how we're using money, what kind of training decisions we're going to make, what kind of staff we're going to hire. So it's just the possibilities are so much richer that you're not guessing.
That's a great way to say it. And the other thing that I would add to that is part of being accountable. First of all, how many of you all make perfect, great decisions in your business life every day? Right? I do. I've never screwed up. Hey, remember they both guessed on the test just for one of the things one of the predicaments that we put principals in especially is the consequences of failure are so high for a principal that they're not managing efficiently. We put them in that really bad situation. What this does is this looks at a principal and says, well, part of your accountability is to jettison a bad decision as early as you possibly can. Don't stick with the darn thing just because you're politically invested in it. When the decision isn't working, come and sit down and say, we got to go in a different direction. This is not working. That's as accountable as succeeding, because not failing is a pretty good thing to do in an organization. See, we lost our way in helping principals lead their schools.
Yeah.
And what this does is this gives the community the opportunity to say, oh no, you're going to lead our schools in in a way that we need you to lead our schools. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could definitely see the value in it. I was just wondering, trying to get a visual of what that would look like.
So I see a couple of things. A, the test that's created for the state accountability doesn't say, here's a test for Alamo Heights and here's a test for East Central.
Right.
The test goes out to everybody. So if you know that the socioeconomic conditions of a child make a big difference, then you would expect Alamo Heights to score better than East Central.
Right.
So you've automatically said, you're a loser, you're a winner based on this, and it's not, it has nothing to do with what the child learned in school. It is just half are going to pass it, half are going to fail it, or 63 and 37, or what those kind of things are. You can't change that when somebody else is making the test. It's not holding you accountable for what your community wants. It's holding you accountable for what the state wants. And maybe the people in the state who are driving this want to get elected the next time, and the way they do that is by screaming about, we got to hold accountable, we got to hold accountable. How can you vote against somebody like that? You know, that's where you want to go with that person. This is what we want for our kids, and we drive it. Now, when we evaluate Mr. Toscano, we never say, you didn't meet what we told you that you should have, so you did a bad job this year. What we look at is, oh, we didn't meet this, but 3/4 of the way through the school year, he knew we weren't going to meet it, and he changed the plan. It's the same thing with this. You look at how you're doing, you change the plan. It is a living document because you can change it based on the accounting and the findings and the input into the engine and how you're looking at it. But it's what do you want for your community, not what does somebody else want for their political career or what looks good in the newspapers or any of those kind of things. I mean, I keep going back to our folks who keep telling us that test is a piece of garbage. It's designed so that half your kids fail. Well, if that's the design of the test, and you have to remember what he said earlier, if they put out a a practice test, and 80% of the kids pass a question, they throw it out. 80% of the kids fail the question, they throw it out. Well, how does that tell you whether a child has learned anything in a classroom or not? It can't tell you anything about that. It just can't.
And what you will find is, some people will say, oh, you're trying to dumb this system down for your kids. No, you want, how many of you are going to raise your hand and say, hey, we'd like dumber kids in East Central? That's not happening. What's happening is, no, we need the best, smartest, most successful kids possible. We just have to get there through a path that's unique for us. Because every community has needs that are different, every community has citizens that are different, and that's what's so powerful in all this. Nobody is dumbing anything down. This will be a much more robust, much richer accountability than anything you've ever seen. You're going to expose things that you guys don't want exposed. You are. You're going to discover things you never knew, and you should just celebrate it. But that kind of honesty is what's going to allow you to move this conversation forward. It's incredibly exciting. Other questions, please.
One of the things that always amazes me is how the hayseeds who created our system were really smart if you think about it. They created independent school districts that were supposed to take care of the kids in their community. They didn't create a statewide system that wanted to make everybody exactly the same. Because the kids in the Panhandle don't need the same thing that the kids in the Valley do. They need a different curriculum. They need to know different things. You know, down in the Valley, you got to be able to pump water out. And you got to find a way to pump water in. It's just or to pump oil, you know, whatever. It's just different parts of the state need different things, and we need to take care of our kids.
Well, and nobody ever leaves this district. You all stay here forever. It's amazing. And that, I know.
Laughing, Judy.
Yeah. But here's what's important. What's important is that the kids who are going to stay here need to be able to have a viable economic future. And maybe that viable economic future is dependent upon the local economy right outside of San Antonio. Just like I knew a group once that put a STEM program into this tiny little district out in the middle of nowhere. Unemployment rose by 30% in the next 5 years because there were no STEM jobs. And the kids all came back. Why didn't they teach them? I mean, they could have done something that would help them be a local economy. Again, these are all, I like your water and environment. Other questions or thoughts before we go on? Anybody else want to comment or chime in with something? Okay. How much longer do we have on this? And you can tell me 5 minutes, or you can tell me 4 hours.
Yeah, I think we're getting pretty close, probably on time, because, so what I'll say, trustees, is the community has built out 2 pillars, and they're here for you to review. What you'll find very interesting is to read the questions that they've suggested we need to try and answer. And again, those questions can be added to, thrown out, they're living, right? What you'll be adopting potentially in January is the pillar function and the change mechanism. So the pillar, each of the pillars, so we've got 2 so far that we think we built out well. Read the questions, and it's going to give you an indication of just how rich these pillars drive the focused improvement of our schools. And then the third is around safety and security. And that when we started, we intend to bring the committee back, or at least a portion of the committee back in December to build out the third, because we hope in January to bring you 3 pillars for you to consider adopting. And we'll start our system trying to report on, or rather trying to account for and look for findings in those 3 pillars, knowing that there's potentially 3 or 4 more pillars we could build out over time to get to a point where we're really addressing every single aspect of school. So this is the first time you've seen this, and you'll get to read it, digest it, think about it, interact with me, ask questions. We're going to come back again and present it to you again, maybe a little more complete. And hopefully you'll have a little more clarity between now and then to make some considerations about taking some action to initiate the system.
Is there any way to track, if we do initiate this, is there a way to track the students after?
So like,
Ensure that.
you've already created a question that's in there.
Yes.
I mean, because if you really are saying this is what you want to do, you probably, one of the things you want to know is, well, what happens when kids leave you? What happens after 1 year? What happens after 2 years? Yeah. That, what he said.
That is exactly the lens that you should approach this with. But here's what I would urge you to do. When you're looking, what you'll notice is that and by the way, you have a couple of versions. You have this version, you have another version that Taffy's got, because again, this is very much a work in progress. We're riffing off each other, we're looking at things, we're hemming and hawing, trying to say, gosh, do we have redundancy there, and so on. So there are multiple versions, which is fine. Don't let that confuse you, that there will only be one version when you adopt it. What you will notice is that the metrics and indicators are thin. There aren't a lot of them. In fact, in some cases, they're to be determined. That's not an error or an omission. We are not starting this conversation with what do we want to measure. We're starting every conversation with what do we want to accomplish. And so once we answer that, we'll figure out the measures. I'm a really good measure. There's nothing I can't figure out a measure to, a survey or whatever. We can get the measures. That's not the problem. The problem is thinking about what do we want to accomplish. And so that's why those questions are so critical. The only metrics that you'll see in here are those that people said when we were meeting with the committee, they wanted them. Well, that's great. We included them. We're going to honor that. But we put them in the metrics camp. But we, as a group, have not added any metrics to what they come up with. So when it says metrics are to be determined, that is not an omission, and it's probably not going to be filled out by the time we get started. That's very intentional. This is driven by what do we want to accomplish, not by what do we want to measure. So that's
Yeah, so think about our district improvement plans where we say this is where we want to go, and the staff comes back and says, okay, this is how we're going to get there, this is going to be budgeted. I would also caution you that you need to make this elephant eatable. 3 to 5 items, not 10 or 20. Make sure that you're going to be measuring things that can be measured. Like if there's something in here that says, how many of our students are gainfully employed 5 years after they graduate? Well, good luck with that, unless you chip all of them. Yeah, we probably aren't going to be able to do that. So, you know, some things that we can actually, and I don't want to force success on us, but I also don't want to force failure on us to begin with. So what are the things that we can measure that show that we're doing it? And many of those are going to happen while the kids are still in school. How many intensive writing courses have they taken? Well, you measure that while they're in school. You don't measure that after they've left. Okay? So those are the kind of things that we have to be careful with it. Don't make that elephant too big. To
Now,
begin
there
with.
are some things that we can find out after they leave. There's a thing called
So
National
I'll give
Student
you-
Clearinghouse and
Yeah.
things like that where we can get some information.
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example of that. Randolph School District, not too many years ago, was deemed academically unacceptable because of their dropout rate. They had kids leaving that school, and they weren't able to track them. 96% of those kids, when they left that school before graduation, went to another military school someplace. Maybe it was in Europe, maybe it was in Africa, but they couldn't find that out. So their dropout rate was based on that. So be careful about trying to track things after our kids have left our school. We have no control over that. We can't make them report to us. Be nice to know. Be really nice to know. But to begin this, we need to concentrate on what we have control over.
So let's do this, because you bring up a really good point. So one of the things, when you think about what do we want to accomplish versus what do we want to measure, maybe one of the things that you want to accomplish is, and maybe the key question is, where are our graduates? And the question is, where are our graduates 1 through 5 years out? Now we have to come up with the measures. That's the fun part. And that's when we come up with measures that we can go after. Go ahead and ask the question. If it's a key question and you think the community is interested, ask it. It doesn't mean that it can always be answered. And that's one of the neat things about a community-based accountability system is just because you have a question there and you come up with findings, the finding may be, right now we can't answer this, but you care, so we're not going to discredit it, but our finding for now is we can't do anything with that. That's okay. Well, hopefully, as we build these systems and more states get involved with this, maybe we will be able to come up with ways to gather data in some new ways. And maybe one day, that question will be able to be answered. So, you're right, when it comes to the measures, we have to be careful. Your point is exactly right, because we can't gather information that we can't get access to that turns into bad inferences. But go ahead and if you think that the question, if you think that the key has a key question that it is important to the community, great. We'll figure out the measure piece behind the scenes. But to your point, maybe we can't measure this right now. That's a legitimate, that's going to be legitimate. All right, let me close out this way real quick and I will get out of your hair because I know you have other topics to talk about. First of all, you're embarked on something that is wildly exciting. I commend you. I'm excited to watch you. I'm excited to do anything I can to support you. What you're doing will have a benefit for your kids that I just don't think you guys can even begin to imagine. But from my interactions with the community, they're starting to get a sense of it. So get this contract in place, get it in place with the community. I applaud you and just anything I can do to be supportive, I'm happy to do it. I don't have to spend a night in a hotel tonight, which I usually do. Drive up the road and sleep in my own bed. So thanks for that very much. Best of luck.
So we're going to flip our agenda right now. We're going to go to item number 5, the very consultation regarding meeting relations.
Trustees, while our guest, Melissa, gets set up, I want to give you a little background on why we've asked her to come by and visit with us today. It is no secret that in recent years, the climate around public education is such that schools are failing, that we need to provide choice. There's a vilification of educators. We know that locally, we're seeing some impact from charter schools that are beginning to show up in the area. This last year was the first year that we actually did not meet enrollment projections in as many years as I know of. We've seen a reduction in projected numbers of students coming in at kindergarten this year for the first time ever. And we know that many of them ended up at the new Harvey-Najum charter school up the road. And so with all of that, and the fact that when you visit with people, and I have in many different contexts, who are trying to learn about ECISD, the community and its schools, and they start with looking at perusing social media, and they peruse our website and things like that, that what they experience is not who we are, that there's a disconnect. Right? It feels very much like a very traditional business of school-oriented community, when in fact we're family, we're about quality, we're about so many more things. And so with all of that, we in recent years have been trying to solve that problem, right? That we make sure that we're putting ourselves out there in the world in a way that really represents who we are. One way that school districts attempt to do this is to hire a position that is typically called a public information officer. The reason we've not done that is because we've not been convinced that that's the solution, and we've learned through our relationship with Go Public. Melissa Ludwig is here representing the DeBerry Group, and she actually led the campaign for Go Public, the marketing campaign, if you will. There's some opportunity, and there's some opportunity to reconsider the whole idea of a PIO, because a PIO can't do everything that a marketing firm can do. That you might need to understand media relations, you might need to understand social media, you might need to understand web design, you might need to understand videography, documentary, production, interviewing. I mean, there's so many aspects to marketing in such a way that you truly put yourself out there in the world in a way that represents who we are, that one person alone can't do it. And so for the first time, I think we're starting to get a little bit of clarity about a direction we might head to ensure that we do that better than we've ever done before, because we're in a time where we have to consider things that we've never considered before. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Melissa to talk to us a little bit about her work and about what might be possible for us to consider by way of a marketing campaign going forward.
So I just wanted to comment that was such an interesting presentation, and Roland and I talked a little bit about the community-based accountability when we had our meeting, and I commented to him because we also got a chance to visit at Tasman's quite a bit. I said, "You guys are really like on fire here at East Central, but I just don't see it. You know, when I Google you, like I don't see it." And so I think what I'm here to, hopefully inspire you to do is just think about how you can start to project who you really are to the community. Some of the stuff that he was talking about on testing, that really outrages me, that there's a certain percentage of kids that are always going to fail these tests, because the way that everyone presents it is that you can catch up. Oh, you have to catch up, you have to always do better, but that's not ever going to happen. You're not ever going to catch up, because you're going to keep changing the test so that a certain percentage of you fail. So you're on a hamster wheel. And everybody's judging you based on that. And you can't control it. You can't control the socioeconomics of your community. But your marketing and your communications, this is something that you can control. You have some opportunity to be proactive. And just like with community-based accountability, to tell your community who you really are and do it in a way that is very impactful and resonant. So you're probably wondering why I'm showing you a picture of me and my sheet. And this is just a little bit of background. I am public school graduate, grew up in Waxahachie, Texas. I did the FFA. I played clarinet and band. My father was in public schools. He was an administrator. So I'm very passionate about public schools and about helping public schools succeed. So this is exciting work for me. I started this journey of public school marketing by working on GovPublic. I spent years covering education for the Express News, for the Austin American Statesman. Once I did go into marketing, education was kind of my specialty, and so when we started the GovPublic campaign, we started it from scratch with the logo, the presentation, the whole marketing campaign. Because that was a joint effort, it was kind of they had a big budget, and they got to do a lot of things that not every school district is going to do, but I just wanted to let you know that there's a lot that's possible even for a small district, and you don't have to do all the things that GoPublic did to really create an impact. But just to show you a little example of some of the things that we did for them, really good content that resonates does matter. And this is one of the things we talked about with talent. Very hard to find one person who can create amazing videos and also do all your web HTML updates and also write a strategic communications plan and do your media relations. So I think the advantage of perhaps an agency is that I have a team of people that do this stuff. Like, I don't make the videos. Somebody else does that and does it very well.
You look back on a life well lived. Your fondest memories are often made not at the destination, but along the journey. It's in discovering your passion and developing your talent while forming friendships you never forget. Whatever career path your child decides to explore, our San Antonio area independent school districts have more opportunities than anywhere else to help them get there.
Very essential. And so I'm just showing you these kind of to give you guys a sense of what we can do with communications and what we can do with the potential marketing effort. Video really is, the best mode of communication, and I think that that's an area where you guys have a lot of opportunity to grow.
From the moment you first see them, you know things will never be the same. Letting go is tough, but it's the first step in learning all they will need to know. Diversity prepares us for the world that awaits. Community brings us together behind one common goal, an excellent education for everyone. Go Public. We're all part of something bigger than ourselves. A nation with a commitment to educate every child. Each day, 340,000 students come through our doors. They are the doctors who will heal our sick, our business builders, our future leaders. They deserve our very best, so we give it every single day.
I also wanted to show you, so those are some scripted videos where you can see where we're really taking a message and just pairing it with the music, the images to make it really impactful. We also did some student testimonials, and this is kind of another direction that you can go, is really finding that voice of your students. I'm sure you guys have amazing students who would have amazing things to say about...
Hi, my name is Patricia Davis. I'm a junior at John Kennedy High School, and I go to Edgewood Independent School District. I'm in National Honor Society, Student Council, Academic Decathlon, CX Debate, Prose and Poetry, UIL Academics Team. Growing up, I had low-grade permanent hearing loss, and I had to go to speech therapy. So I was progress-wise a late bloomer. In Prose and Poetry, you basically read a scene from a book and you bring it to life. They critique you on a variety of things, your posture, judgment, and also too, they judge you on your enunciation and pronunciation, and I've learned to enunciate and become a better speaker. I'm a chatterbox now. Most people ask, do you have an off switch? It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It's about using the tools and resources that are provided for you. Doing these extracurricular activities and going to a school that didn't have all that, I probably wouldn't be able to show who I was.
For that campaign, we also did some billboards, which you can see here, that I think were really nice, beautiful photos of these students. They were all real students from local area ISDs. We did the website for them. And I just kind of want to show you that so you can see what it looks like when there's a cohesive, strong look and feel to something. You know, it gives you a feeling, it gives you an impression, a perception. And that's what you want people to feel about East Central as well. Another campaign that we worked on that I wanted to show you was San Angelo ISD. And this is a school district that's a little bit bigger than yours, but not too much, about 15,000 students out in the middle of West Texas. And San Angelo really wanted to do what I was talking about here. Like they just wanted something that would resonate with their community, that would really keep people engaged in the school system, to make them proud of being part of the school system. So what we did for them, we started with a survey actually to find out what was going to resonate most with people. We found out that it was teachers. So we focused our campaign on teachers. It was called Our People Make a Difference, and here's a few examples of work.
My job is my life. These are the hardest working kids I have ever been around. I do not treat these kids like children, I treat them as young adults. I'm Joey Ashford, the band director at Central High School in San Angelo ISD. When I got here 5 years ago, the band had around 180 students, and now we have 418 enrolled. This past year, we took the band to the state march contest for the first time in 33 years, and we're so very proud of the work. We get to the first football game. We come out and we turn around and hit the first note, and the entire stadium erupts in applause. We finish the show, and it's stadium ovation for 5 minutes. The kids are walking on the field all in tears. And they're like, that was great. No one has ever stood up for us before. If someone doesn't have enough food to eat, they don't have a place to stay, they don't have clothes, we come together as a family to take care of them. I love my students, they're my kids. At San Angelo ISD, our people make the difference.
Visit SAISD.org to see how. I ask my students to write on a card what they want their legend to be. I want my legend as a teacher to be that I made a difference. I'm Julie Schneers, and I coach speech and debate at Central High School in San Angelo ISD. When I started this job 10 years ago, fresh out of college, I had big plans. Today, we are ranked in the top 5% of programs in the nation, and we fielded multiple state and national champions. One of our legends won the national championship in poetry, which is huge. What few knew was that he was homeless, bouncing from one relative to another until he had no place to go. I helped him as much as I could, but even he will tell you that what helped him the most was being on the team. He found a home here, a place he could shine. At San Angelo ISD, our people make a difference. Visit SAISD.org to see how.
This was the landing page that we created for that campaign, where we showed all the 6 teachers that we featured, and we showed all of the videos so that you could go to one place and really get a sense for who these people were. Both of these campaigns, something that they had in common was a digital component, and I'm not going to bore you with a lot of that talk, but I did want to briefly touch on what I think the opportunity is right now for school districts, especially those with a limited budget. I do think it's in digital. So you guys probably can't afford billboards. You probably can't afford broadcast TV. What you can afford to do is spend a little bit of money on Facebook, spend a little bit of money on YouTube, and very precisely target your audiences, your community. You can put your zip codes in there, and the people in your community will see your ads, or outside your community if you're trying to recruit outside. So when we talk about brand identity too, it's that thing that differentiates you. And surveys, focus groups, market research can help you identify what sets you apart from your competitors. What do people really identify with when they talk about East Central? Some of this community-based accountability, you may get some great data out of this that you can actually use to help you do this. When you create a strong brand, it's really your strategic position, what you are known for. And it should be projected across all of your platforms and in all of the materials that you put out and the way you communicate. And everybody should be singing from the same songbook. They also want to see that, like when we talked about online, they want to go online and just see this like strong, consistent message and aesthetic that says, this is East Central. Your online presence, we talked about some of this, but you want your website to be clean, simple, visually appealing, optimized for mobile. That's very important these days. And you want it to be designed around the specific actions that you'd like people to take when they visit. And so some of that is defining how you want people to engage with you. It should reflect your brand and key messages and incorporate keywords and other tactics to really enhance your search engine optimization. Social media, you guys are already embracing social media to share content, engage with your community, and I think there are always opportunities there to reflect your message better with social media. Your online reputation is important. It's an important thing to maintain, and that's how you look at reviews on Google, Facebook, Yelp, GreatSchools.com. Some of this is stuff that you can't control, but I think as you get into this community-based accountability, you're going to be able to put forth some different messages about your community and to distill those down and present them in a really compelling way so that your people are not focusing on those test scores and on some of those rankings that you can't control. They're focusing on the things that you want them to focus on, that you're putting out there in front of them. Email lists. Collecting a substantial email list, engaging with your subscribers regularly, following best practices in terms of the way that looks and reads is also very important to keeping your community engaged. Human resources is really all about storytelling. I won't belabor this point because we already talked about it, but storytelling is about finding authentic, moving stories that inspire real emotion in people. They are real stories. That takes some work to do, and it takes some work to cultivate. You may know of them off the top of your head, but how do you package them in a compelling way that really actually makes people cry a little bit? So the quality of the content really is huge. It's got to be great. Your photos, your print products, everything needs to look great because that sends subtle messages to people about who you are. Expertise, that's what we talked about. There's so many points of expertise that you need to pull off a really good communications campaign. Very hard to find in one person. But you want to, if you are going to embark on a campaign, you want to set goals, you need to work with vendors to place ads, you want to monitor your ads, you want to make sure that you have ROI, that you're getting some return on your investment there, that you're evaluating the media universe in your community, the behaviors of your consumers, and that you're getting the most bang for your buck. The way to do that in today's world is really digital marketing. 8 in 10 Americans have smartphones, 7 in 10 Americans have a social media account. Everyone's on it, everybody's doing it. Moms check Facebook an average of 10 times per day now. YouTube, this is in the millions of unique visitors by age, and as you can see, that millennial parent is right there at the top. And these are your parents, and this is where you can find them. Another great way now to get your message out is through streaming services. Pretty cost efficient, like you're watching Hulu and you see an ad, you can buy that ad. That ad can be yours. For the people watching in your community, I should say. So key takeaways, I think it's just important to decide at some point that you're going to make marketing a priority. I think it's a place that a lot of districts are getting to these days where they're starting to realize that this is just something we're going to start having to think about. Don't keep doing things the way that you always have just because. Really take a hard look at all of your communications efforts to determine what is working and what's not. Be strategic. Think it through as opposed to taking a rushed or a scattershot approach. Make the look, feel, and message consistent across all your communication channels. Value quality over quantity. It's not about how much. It's just like a crowded web page. That's valuing quantity over quality. There's no such thing as free advertising. This is something you should know up front if you're going to embark on marketing. There will be a hard cost involved because you will have to pay some money to put your message out there. And if you spend money making sure that it's high quality and it's great and you're really proud of it, you want people to see it. With a limited budget, we recommend to lean into digital because it's always going to give you the best bang for your buck. And then don't be afraid to ask for help and know when to call on the expert so that you can focus on your core duties, which is running a school. So I know I don't have a ton of time, but if anybody has any comments or questions. Okay. Well, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. Very impressive.
Okay, now, best discussion of the evening, not really. Boundaries, school boundaries. Always and she's leaving.
Yeah, I did not want to talk about school. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
So I think, I hope that everybody's realized that with the new school coming online, we're going to have to shift some boundaries around. And so with that, you're on.
All right, so we all knew that when we engaged the community and they approved the 2016 bond program, that with the new school coming on board, we were going to begin to need to look at school boundaries. And what we had shared with the community during that time was that we would probably start by looking at Highway 87, looking at north of 87 residences, and starting our discussions there, because we now had a school north of 87 for the first time. We for the past year or throughout this year have been working diligently to run some scenarios, and we've come across a couple of challenges. The first challenge that the group came up against was that if we just look at boundaries north of 87, go to Tradition, and south of 87, go into Oak Crest, if you will, for 4 and 5, that you end up in a situation where you've got kids that go to Tradition pre-K to 3, and then they've got to leave some and go to Oak Crest for 4th and 5th, while at the same time you have kids at St. Clair pre-K to 3 who for 4 and 5 end up going to Tradition if they're in the China Grove area. So you have a situation where kids who've been in Tradition leave and kids who have not been in Tradition come. So we figured really quickly that that's probably not going to be the best option. The other thing that has since developed since the passing of the bond is you see the residential development between Foster Road and Foster Meadows. It's amazing that every patch of land still continues to have houses built on it around Sinclair, that we knew we were going to need to provide a little relief. We're doing an addition there and some renovations that we thought were going to provide enough relief, but the reality of it is we needed to really look at Sinclair as well. And so for all of those reasons, the committee, we think, has come up with the best option at this point in time for us to begin our discussion. And so the committee that met repeatedly, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times, Taffy, Stevie, Jim, Lynette, Glenn and Don from Transportation, and Cindy Zerwin as well in Lynette's office. So we've had the team on it that needed to be on it, and they put a lot of time and effort into it. And so at this point, I'm going to have Mr. Selby kind of give the board an overview of what our current boundaries are and what our proposed boundaries are and what the impact of that would be. And our intention today is just to present that to you, answer any questions, get any feedback. Our other intention is that Thursday at our principals meeting, for the first time, then we'll begin to discuss preliminary boundary thoughts with principals, because here in very short order, the board's going to need to make some final decisions about that. because there are staffing implications and obviously communication implications, transportation implications, quite a bit of implications that we really need to take advantage of the entire spring to get all that work and all that communication done in an appropriate manner for our community and staff. So, Mr. Selby?
I'll be presenting a lot of the information, but both Ms. Hertz and Ms. Gonzalez are going to fill in all the gaps that I leave out.
I'm sure you do.
I'm sure I'll do great. Before we begin, as Mr. Toscano indicated, we did meet several times. Some of the criteria that we used in developing this was balancing the numbers the best we could with elementary and intermediate school. And that doesn't mean every school has the exact same number, but for the capacity that they have, we also wanted to try to make sure there was some growth capacity at each campus if at all possible. And we believe this does that. Reducing the transition from campus to campus as much as we could. We didn't eliminate it all of it, but we did reduce it quite a bit. Growth capacity, and then you'll see that it also begins the possibility of transitioning from pre-K 3, which we're moving to now, to possibly pre-K 5 in the future. So what I'm going to do, you have a copy of this in your folder, and I'll start off at each campus with the existing attendance zones. And you can see here, this is John Glenn attendance zone. It's rather large. It goes as basically the northeastern quadrant of the district. And it goes all the way to the district boundary line to the north and to the east, and down to basically parts of 181, Calaveras Lake, and all the way back up to Sulphur Springs Road, and then kind of jig-jags around on the western boundary line. Currently, John Glenn, as of October, has 632 students in grades pre-K through 3rd. With tradition, what we looked at was looking at those areas north of 87. And at first, what we were going to do, if you recall when we talked about this in the bond, was basically leaving John Glenn's attendance zone roughly the same for pre-K through 3rd, and everybody that's currently going to Oak Crest north of 87 moving then possibly to tradition. And as Mr. Toscano indicated, that sounded good until you start looking at the numbers and you begin to realize the number of transitions different students were going to have to make that didn't quite make sense. So what we decided to do was to make everybody that lived north of 87, including the students that are currently going to Sinclair, that are in this area right in here. This is your Joe Louis Drive, your Tierra Bonita, the Triple area, and China Grove area basically, and also even Beck Road. Well, excuse me, that's a little bit different down the road. So what we looked at was using those new boundary lines, and you have, as I indicated, that the boundary line would still be the same to the north. It'd be the district boundary line. To the east, the district boundary line. But once you get to Highway 87, everybody north of 87 up to Foster Road and back up to the district boundary line would all go to tradition, pre-K through 5. And by doing that, we would estimate that we would open up to 682 students, and that would allow for about 268 additional students capacity or growth over the coming years. That's quite a bit. The other model that we looked at didn't provide that growth capacity. Not at all.
I think it actually maxed out at like 3 years or something.
Yeah, about 3, maybe 5 years max, and you'd have to have another school or put portables out there. And this allows for much more time. In this particular model, all the students attending tradition would go pre-K through 5. They wouldn't have to transition to any other campus until middle school. Any questions on that? That make sense? All right. That's something. Looking at Oak Crest, this is the current attendance zone for Oak Crest. And once again, it's a rather large area. It's very similar to John Glenn's attendance zone, but it also includes Harmony's attendance zone. So it takes everything really in the basically the eastern half of the district. Oak Crest, as of October, had 770 students. Hence why we had the portable there, 2 portable. And they're only grades 4 and 5 right now. What we're proposing in this model is for us to go from Oak Crest being an intermediate school to being an elementary school. And they would become pre-K through 5th. But to demonstrate this, because we only have so much room there, we're going to have to show you pre-K 3 first, because that'll be a slightly different attendance zone than 4 and 5. So what we would do is take the remnants of what was John Glenn's southern attendance zone, the area south of 87, all the way to 181, go along Calaveras Lake, and back over to Sulphur Springs, up Foster. But also this area, which is currently part of Sinclair, including Beck Road to the east, Sulphur, and this area that's off of Sulphur Springs, and then Foster, and the southern portion of Highway 87, this little trapezoid looking thing. Is that a trapezoid?
I can't see the cursor.
Oh, the cursor's not moving?
Yeah, it's not moving.
What is
I
that?
can't see it.
Yeah, that's it.
I thought maybe it's because I can't see very well.
No cursor.
No cursor. Well, I could see it quite well. Anyway, if you look up there, there's a little to the northwest corner of that green area, or the highlighted area. There's a little almost trapezoid looking thing. That's what is currently kids going to Sinclair. If you take all that area along Highway 87 south to 181, Calaveras, the southern boundary line of Calaveras Lake, all the way back up to Foster Road, and take Foster all the way to 87, that would all become Oak Crest pre-K through 3. The rest of the area to the south and southwest is currently Harmony's attendance zone, and that will stay the same. For 4th and 5th, you basically take all of the existing Oak Crest attendance zone south of Highway 87, and that would all become, would continue to be 4th and 5th for Oak Crest. So if you combine those maps together, and I didn't want to do that in an overlay that was even more confusing, I just wanted to show you the 2 maps that would become ultimately the Oak Crest Elementary School attendance zone, pre-K through 5.
So what are we doing with John Glenn then?
So John Glenn goes away. It's going to be John Glenn itself, the campus, will be used as an annex to the high school to provide for additional capacity at the high school. The new traditional elementary school will allow for those kids north of 87, pre-K through 5th, to go to that school.
That was just a question I was asking about John Glenn, is that okay, you're taking kids here and taking kids there, where's okay, it's going to be at John Glenn, the elementary, John Glenn elementary will be absorbed by the high school.
Yeah, okay.
What's left of it? Part of it's going, part of the school will be demolished.
Well, part of the school will be demolished. There's 2 older wings that are about 65 years old or better, and it's just more cost effective to tear those down and to try to. So basically, this is a narrative that explains what I just kind of went through with pre-K through 5. You're going to have the attendance zone, as I just described, for 4th and 5th, everything south of 87 that's currently Oak Crest attendance zone. And then pre-K through 3 will be the area as I described, from south of 87 over to the attendance boundary line to the east, all the way down to 181, cut across Calaveras, back up Foster Road to 87. That would be the pre-K through 3. You would still have some kids transitioning, for example, from Harmony to Oak Crest, but you'd have a lot fewer having to transition than you do now. So we couldn't eliminate all of it, but we did reduce it quite a bit. With this model, what we're looking at is having around 680 to 90 students and giving capacity for about 60 student growth, 61 students.
How much is it gonna cost to, I mean, because we obviously have to change the names on, not the names, but the, yeah.
Yeah, there'll be a cost for the marquees and the signage up there
What else do we, is there
and
anything?
letterhead,
Letterhead,
basically.
pretty much, okay.
Judy will have to make some changes with the numbering system with TA. She loves me for this, I'm sure. But it's easy, piece of cake.
Yeah, so she's here at 6:30 every morning.
She's over here saying,
Way to go, Judy.
Cussing them out.
Any questions on any other questions? Current Salado attendance zone, as you can see, is basically goes up. It's the western half of the district, roughly. It follows the to the north, the boundary line to the north. It follows those areas that are currently in Sinclair attendance zone, and then kind of follows that line that you see on the east and all the way to the district boundary line south and east. It's rather, once again, fairly large, but what we're proposing is, and it has around 762 students. We're proposing to leave that the way it is. It has enough capacity for another 100 plus students with this model, and so it would make things where there'd be no changes there. And it would remain an intermediate school 4th and 5th. You look at Sinclair, their current attendance boundary line is once again fairly large. It goes all the way up to Foster. You see the road that's kind of going there. It has 87 as the boundary line, and it kind of cuts across the imaginary line over to Foster Road, goes straight up north, then follows 10. Well, actually goes across from 10 and Foster back over to just this side of 1516, and then follows 1516 down, and then kind of goes in along Highway 87 until you get to Beck Road and come down Beck, and then it would go back into that area. And then along the south would be Sulphur Springs. I don't know if that described it very well, but there it is. They have around 655 students as of the October count. But what we would propose is to fairly dramatically reduce the attendance zone for Sinclair. If you remember, to that northern portion of Sinclair's attendance zone, current attendance zone was going to go to Tradition. So that gets reduced quite a bit up there. The eastern portion that goes all the way to Beck Road is proposed to go to Oak Crest. And so that goes away. And also, right now you have an area, I wish I had a pointer.
Just go stand up there.
If you want, or I can just stand up here. I'm sure they'd like rather see me. This area would all be part of and going to Con Valley into this model. We haven't got to that yet. Right now, Con Valley has South Crest. Under this model, they would pick up South Cross Ranch and Crestwood. So by reducing that attendance zone for Sinclair, you would have, and this is a narrative that describes those new attendance zones and where everybody's going. You have Sinclair in 2019-20 would go from K3 to pre-K3. They would have an attendance zone that would have Highway 87 to the north. Foster Road, it would be the eastern boundary. New Sulphur Springs, the east of Foster, into South Cross Ranch Road, south and western boundary lines would stay the same. These areas, such as China Grove, the Triples, Joe Louis, Tierra Bonita, would all be moving to Tradition. The current students going to Sinclair living east of Foster Road and south side of Highway 87, all the way up to the Buck Road area would go to Oak Crest. And then students living in Crescent Place in South Cross Ranch would go to Pine Valley. With this model, we would open up in 2019 with 580 students and have capacity for 180 students in growth.
I know they're doing a lot of construction out there off of Foster Meadows.
Yeah, and that's part of what we were trying to do is give them that capacity. And this would do that. That's a lot of kids, 180. Even with the classes that are going in there now, I think this would handle that fairly well. Harmony, this is their current attendance zone, and the idea is to leave that the way it is. There wouldn't be any changes in Harmony. Harmony Wood is currently K3 and has 522 students. In 2018-19, they would still be K3, and we're estimating them to have around 538 if they grew like they did this year. Students, and in 2019-20, they would open up with pre-K through third with roughly, if the growth continues at that same pace, 624 students, and still have capacity for 193 students. So they would still have certainly areas of growth as well. Con Valley, this is their current attendance zone, pretty much the northwest quadrant of the district. They have 521 students as of October. And the idea with Con Valley is to do a little swapping. We would take that area that's currently part of Sinclair, the South Cross Ranch and Crescent Place, move that into Con Valley. But we would also take Woodbridge, this area here, that's always been a bone of contention, that is currently going to Con Valley, but now go to Island Forest. By doing that, what that does is allow, even though Con Valley has 521 students now, by making those little swaps by 2019-20, you can go to 544 students and have a capacity of around 116 students. Island Forest, kind of the southwestern quadrant of the district, currently has 454 students as of October. And what we're proposing there is, once again, not as clear as we would like to be, I would like to be, but basically we pick up this area that was currently part of Con Valley, that northern portion of Woodbridge, to now go to Island Forest. And that, along with the students from pre-K, would result in them having capacity for another 44 students and would be able to open up with 556 students is an estimated number for 2019-20. So, and I just go through what I just read. They have a capacity they would have approximately 556 students in 2019-20 and have additional capacity of 144. All right. Summing it up, what we were able to do with this model is you have a traditional elementary school and Oak Crest Elementary School would both become pre-K through 5th grade. Salado Intermediate School would stay 4 and 5, have capacity for growth. Harmony, Pine Valley, and Sinclair would also become pre-K through 3rd and have capacity for growth. We'd have more students who would transition between fewer campuses, and the example I gave was Tradition, but also Oak Crest would have fewer transitions, and those that are transitioning, for example, that would still be in Pine Valley or Sinclair or even Harmony's attendance zones are already making that same transition. So there wouldn't be a change there or an increase. And it also allows us to begin the process of looking at pre-K through, move from pre-K through 3rd to a pre-K through 5th grade elementary school model. And really, we'll start that off in these, if we were to follow these models, start off with Tradition and Oak Crest, have a 2 or 3 to a 5-year period where you kind of look at how that goes, if there's any issues, how do we work through those, and then if we feel comfortable, could then come back and recommend possibly looking at other campuses later on, making those transitions. A couple of things that you would, one, we certainly want to talk about this, make sure that you're comfortable with what we're presenting. If there's any questions, we'll certainly answer those for you if we can. But also then we need to look a little bit down the road. We need, if you're comfortable with this or if you need some additional information, we'll certainly get that for you. But in an effort to try to have this start going forward, we're going to need to look at setting at least 2 different public meetings, which we've done in the past, where we present this to the public and get feedback from them. And quite often they have some information or ideas we hadn't thought about that certainly worth considering and integrating into the models. And then ultimately it would come back to you with a final recommendation to you, and then you would take action on that. And we hope we could do that in January, but that's up to the board, obviously. You don't want to rush it, but you also need to give us enough time to begin to make those plans that we would need for staffing purposes and just for the communication that would be needed to make sure that everybody knew what was going to happen.
And transportation route configurations.
Yes, definitely. The other thing that we've done in the past when we've done something along this line is grandfather students currently going to an existing school, so that if the parents would prefer, they can finish out their career there at that school, student career. But the parents would be responsible for transportation if that were to take place, and siblings that haven't started school yet would have to go to the new school. There's great issues. So those are just things to be aware of. Yes?
I understand all the numbers, and that's fine, I don't have a problem. My question would be, I guess from a parent's standpoint, how much more travel is that going to be for the student than they're moving around?
Actually, with the students in Tradition and for Oak Crest, there should be either the same or less travel, because you're basically taking this large area and cutting it in half. And so what goes along with this is that we're building a satellite station for transportation out at Tradition school site area. So those buses would be focused on providing that transportation to the students to Tradition. wouldn't have to, if you left it the way it is now, those same buses would have to come all the way to Oak Crest if some of those kids were not allowed to stay at Tradition. So it should reduce at least many of the kids' transportation times.
But I would think that would be a parent's concern. Wait a minute, you're changing the boundaries, and my child is going to this school, and they're going to move to this other one. What is the difference in the transportation? I think that would be their question.
And I think in most cases, it will be less transportation. We can't say that absolutely for every single.
Yeah, but when we talked about that, I think the only scenario where there could be the possibility of a little more travel is some of the China Grove students going to Tradition as compared to some of the southern portion of China Grove, closer to 87, that go to St. Clair now, might have to travel a little further to go to Tradition. But in all other cases, they're actually in closer proximity to the campus that they'll be going to now, as opposed to the campus they're
I
currently.
think that'd be one point that they would have to be addressed to us folks.
But their benefit is they get sent to the same school the whole time.
Right, right. Well, that would be a plus, but I think the first thing they're gonna see is, wait a minute, how much more times my child is gonna be moving?
And there's obviously classroom capacity at Oak Crest, right, to add those 3
Yes.
additional grades, even though.
Yes, there is.
Well, I know we're decreasing, the enrollment's decreasing, right, pretty much?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because they're
But just
losing all the kids
classroom-wise,
north of
though.
87.
Right, but just classroom-wise, I'm thinking, do we have enough classrooms to,
Yes.
okay.
But you'd only meet with the parents that's involved with the rezoning, am I right? Or you meet with everyone?
The public meetings are for everybody, so basically this would impact almost the whole district. So we would send out information to pretty much all the parents, and then have it on our website, have it at the schools, make sure the principals are sharing it at PTA meetings and all those types of things to get the word out. And then have the meetings, we're thinking about maybe one before Christmas and one after Christmas. And then that gives us enough time to provide, based on that feedback we get from the community, if we need to tweak it any, we can, and then bring that to the board in January regular meeting for potential action by the board.
And you mentioned if they want to be grandfathered to stay at that school, they're responsible for their own transportation.
Yes, sir.
That's an option they have.
For the current students currently enrolled in the
Right,
school.
currently.
Any siblings that haven't started would have to go to the new school, new attendance.
Well, you did have an option there.
Yeah.
And for the pre-K kids at Oak Crest, would we do the same improvements we're making in the other schools?
I'm sorry.
The pre-K students that are gonna go to Oak Crest?
All right, I'm okay.
The microphone is there. Are we gonna make the same improvements that we're making at our other schools? I mean, because we're making, they're lower toilets, they're
Yes.
specific to
Yes,
the pre-K.
exactly. What we would do is, for example, at Highland Forest, we had always planned to move pre-K there. So I've already visited with that principal, and we're looking at what module is going to be dedicated to pre-K. That'll tell us what restrooms need to be modified. And you're right, what we'll have to do is take the current toilets and move them to the little 12-inchers, and urinals will have to be a little lower.
How soon can
sinks
we
and
do
so-
that at Oak Crest though? I mean, is
we
that
can
gonna
do-
be?
The Oak Crest is identical, it's just a mirror image floor plan of Highland Forest.
Okay.
So what we would do is determine what would be the best wing or module to put little kids in.
Just make the
And
improvements.
then that restroom that's dedicated to that module would be modified. Each one of those classrooms has a wet area, has sinks in them and all, so they'll be very suitable for that.
Okay.
It'd be obviously nicer to have restrooms in every single one. But the way those are set up, it's very close, and it's much easier than in a lot of our other campuses for them to get kids in and out of those restrooms. So what do y'all think? Really? Excellent. The city, the brilliance came from the ladies. I'm just a talking head.
Especially getting the numbers of the kids
Good
and
job.
making sure that all match.
Yeah.
Thank you. For Mr. Jones.
Well, if you have any questions later on, please let Mr. Toscano know. We'll be glad to answer those for you. If you feel okay with that, we'll continue to build on this model. There's a few other things we need to make sure that we're looking at, but
I think you're good.
So then to clarify, then our next step will be to schedule a community meeting. Our plan is maybe one before the Christmas break and then one after, in an effort to kind of present this proposal to them and get some feedback. And then we'll also, this Thursday, present for the first time this same idea to principals and get their feedback. Bring all of that back to you in the form of a formal recommendation in January for your consideration. And then at that point, we'll launch the communication plan as well as we'll get, a personnel team on working on staffing, and we'll deploy transportation on beginning to look at route configurations, and we'll spend the entire spring doing all of that at that point, from the point the board takes the official action on. Okay? All right.
Sounds good?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So before we adjourn, does anybody have anything else?
Sir?
Okay. We are adjourned.